Well, welcome back. This is the second video for Discerning Worldviews, and we're going to continue on where we left off last time. And last time we were talking about the definition for worldview, how it differs from religion and culture. So we looked at those aspects of it, came up with our preferred definition of the worldview. Then we talked about the different universal themes of the worldview, cosmic theme, time, space, so forth, like that. And then we did a couple exercises, and then we talked about some key questions by James Sire, who writes a lot on worldview, to talk about how to talk about our worldview. And so those were the things we were doing, and then we got into the next section, which was having to do with models, trying to look at the worldviews through some models that I developed, and that's what we work on when we stopped the last video. So I am going to share the screen here with you. We'll go back to the video and okay. Get the settings right. All right, we talked about this part right here, the worldview models, and that's what we're using this to make models for different worldviews. And we did this one, which was the secular worldview, and saying how that there is a physical realm, but only the physical realm exists, and it happened all by accident and the Big Bang theory that goes with that. This is just a secular worldview that we talked about last time. Now we're moving on. Here's another worldview. You'll notice it's similar to the secular worldview. You do have the physical world, material world here, and then there's history, linear history that's going on. There's a beginning and an end. But in this case, you have God, but the arrow goes only one way. And so this one you might be able to identify it, but it's a deistic worldview. And some of the early founders of this nation, usually they point to Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson as two of the main ones that were probably deists to one degree or another. But the vast majority of the founding fathers were not. But this view basically is just saying there's a God. There had to be something that could have designed this world because it's too complex to have happened by accident. Therefore, there has to be a God. But this God just kind of created it, set it to run by natural law, and then kind of left us on our own. So you see here, it's God created the world and set it to run by natural law. God does not intervene miraculously. God is separate from the world, but also remote since he doesn't intervene. Some of the founding fathers, as I mentioned, held this view. And there is the linear view of history, just like in secularism, there's a beginning and an end. But God, for the most part, is uninvolved. So that would be the deistic worldview. Next is this one. It looks a lot more complex than the ones we've been looking at. You've got God up here at the top, and then you got the spiritual realm. Now notice God's kind of in the spiritual realm, but not quite. He's not actually in the same category as the spiritual realm. Then you got the physical world. Notice how much the spiritual realm overlaps with the physical realm. But notice that God doesn't overlap here with the physical realm. And this one would be hard for a person to identify, but this is African worldview, particularly the Meru people where my wife and I worked. And their view of the world is there is a huge spiritual realm. It's full of ancestral spirits, evil spirits, but there's a big spiritual realm. And when a person dies, they become ancestors and they live with the ancestral spirits in the spiritual realm. However, for them, God is distant. He He is involved, but just remotely. And they had people, that specialists like a prophet, who would access God for them and things like that. But generally, the best you do is offer a sacrifice to God. For example, when we first arrived there, it's in the middle of a drought, and they were taking a black goat up the mountain to offer it as a sacrifice to God, Marungu, and to ask for rain because they were in such a severe drought. And you'll notice here that you can access God, uh, praying and other things, and sacrifice. But God doesn't communicate a whole lot here. There may be things He does occasionally, but it's very indirect. And that's going on. But really, what impacts the physical world is the spiritual realm here, back and forth, ancestral spirits. That's where your main communication. I've had people tell me, don't do certain things because it disturbs the ancestors. But as far as the world, the physical world is concerned, they believe there's a beginning. God created the world, and there will be an end, although there's no real theology of what happens at the end. But you have diviners and sorcerers who help people access information from the spiritual realm. Diviners help you find out, oh, have you offended the ancestors? Sorcerers, on the other hand, are witch doctors, and they tend to do evil things and cause problems for people. So when you talk about that, you have another one. This is very similar to the Meru. It's the Batutsis, Bahutu, and Batwa, who were in Rwanda. And they have a very similar view, except that they divide this spiritual realm into three parts. But otherwise, it's very similar to the Meru. So there is a spiritual realm of ancestral spirits who are the things, the spiritual side that influences everyday life. God is obscure to humanity. They believe in one God, but they don't know a lot about him. Generally, he's thought of as good, like the Meru people will call him Mwene Inya, the Almighty God, we would say in English. Or Murungu Njiru was the god of blackness, which is the equivalent of saying holy God, like that. Mumbi, they would call him the God, creator God. And so you can see, there is the belief in God. And with death, one joins the ancestral spirits. And I asked one time, I said, what happens after death, and what are the ancestral spirits doing? They said, well, they're planting their gardens and harvesting just like here on Earth. And so basically, that's how they view the spiritual life. But those ancestral spirits can help protect their family and clan and so forth. They do believe in linear history, beginning and end, but God, in this case, is distant. Now, when they hear the Bible being taught about God, God of the Old Testament and God of the New Testament, they can very much see that this is the God they don't know much about. And so helps a lot of them become followers. All right, here's another one that you might recognize. You got the big spiritual realm here, and the dotted line basically means it's very porous. In other words, there's a lot of back and forth with the material world. And you notice the lines, God is communicating this way, can communicate back. It's a material world, linear history. And maybe this helps some. Yeah, this is a Christian worldview. And so when we think of what the Bible teaches about the worldview, we know there is God and he has a spiritual realm. And of course, talks about the Trinity, God, Son, Holy Spirit, but also talks about angels, cherubim, seraphims. There's activity in the spiritual realm. And, we see passages such as, the angels rejoice over one person that is found and, becomes a follower of Christ. Or you see in the book of Revelation, there's the angels in heaven and people who've died already in heaven. So active spiritual realm. But the thing is that the Bible depicts that God's highly involved, and ultimately he's so involved that he becomes a human being in Christ, Jesus in the flesh, and shows how much he cares for the humanity he created in his image by becoming one, and then on top of that, dying for them. And in that life and death, he's teaching about how to be a follower of him. And so the material world is real, but it's not synonymous with God, but God works in it. And, he created the world and he will bring it to the end. That is a basic Christian worldview, or we might call it a biblical worldview. And so we want to keep that one in mind because we'll be comparing it to some others later on. Well, so for a Christian worldview or biblical worldview, world created by a personal God, purposeful creation. God continues to interact with his creation. God acts and people respond. People exist in a relationship with God. So it's, there's not only our physical relationships, but there's a spiritual relationship too. Linear material world to eternal existence. In other words, have beginning, they'll have an end, and then those who are committed to Christ will live in eternity with Christ. God, Christ, the I am, is self-revealing and communicating. The whole picture of God throughout biblical history is he's always communicating to his creation, the ones he made in his image, and giving them direction in life, and yes, even correcting them when necessary. So we see this Christian worldview and all through the Bible. And ultimately, the incarnation, when God becomes flesh, like says in the beginning of the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. And the Word was with us, and then later on it'll say it became flesh. So that's the ultimate interaction with God, much contrary to, very much contrary to like deism or the secular world, which sees no spiritual dimension whatsoever. All right, here's another one. You might think about this one. You got the spiritual realm, just like you did in Christianity. You've got the physical realm and linear history, the beginning and the end. Here I've put submission. This might be a giveaway if you study other world religions. But and there is communication from the spiritual realm and communication back to the spiritual realm. But notice that the spiritual realm really doesn't overlap with the physical realm like you saw in Christianity. Maybe that helps some. Allah. In other words, there's God, there's a spiritual realm where there's angels and so forth, and there even is Satan as well in Islam. And so, but one of the big differences is this lack of overlap with the spiritual realm, with the human, the interaction of God with humanity. God is much more remote in Islam. He's more transcendent and doesn't have, it's not like having a personal relationship with God that the Bible talks about. And he's sovereign, and whatever he demands is it. You submit to it without question, and it is what his will is. And so it's quite different in some ways, even though there's a lot of similarities as well. So when we talk about Islam, we have to note that the world was created by a sovereign transcendent God. We would agree with that as Christians. God rewards and punishes. That we would also agree with. God demands submission and obedience. Christians wouldn't disagree with that either. God not influenced by his creation. Now this is where we will start some deviating a bit because God is so transcendent, so sovereign. For most Muslims, it's the idea of him, praying to God and influencing his decision, as we see being done in the Bible on a number of occasions. God says he changes his mind about what he was going to do because of the prayer of Moses or the prayer of someone. So this one in Islam, God's so transcendent, so sovereign, you can't really change whatever he's already put in place. People exist in obedience to God. We wouldn't disagree with that. Linear material world to eternal existence. And they believe, like Christians believe, that you live, and if you live in a right relationship with God, you're going to be saved. One of the main differences, and as we get into Islam, we'll talk about this some more, is that in Christianity, there's the assurance of salvation through what Christ has done on the cross. They don't have that assurance in Islam, and so they really struggle with the idea: are they really saved? Are they good enough to be saved? And it's almost a work type of mentality in Islam. So, but we'll talk more about that when we get to Islam. Here's one that's really quite different from the others, and it's what you might expect, given the others are, you have the Christianity and Islam as monotheistic religions. But this one, you notice that you have the world, material world, as we would call it, and in it you got multiple gods. But then you have these dotted lines here. It's what we call a universal reality there. The individual lives within this, the confines of this material world, and they go through a cycle of samsara, which we would call reincarnation. And so the individual soul or often goes through this cycle, not the physical being. So when a person dies, depending on their karma, their good deeds or bad deeds, they come back reincarnated either up the scale or down the scale in purity. And so that might help. Universal reality, Brahman, as it's called, is this universal reality. And so this would be Hindu worldview. And so when we think about how different this is, there's no spiritual realm up here and no interaction with the spiritual realm. The gods are within this physical realm, which in Hinduism, the spiritual realm, this material world, is not real. It's not, we look at this desk I'm sitting at and say, well, it's here, it's really real, and it's right here. Well, in Hinduism as well as in Buddhism, is the material world is an illusion or a mental construct that really doesn't exist. I know that really seems odd to us as Westerners, but that's how they understand the world. That's part of their worldview. And in fact, the point of, and we'll talk about this in Hinduism, what's the point of Hinduism is if you can get released from the cycle of samsara so that you can be absorbed into Brahman. And they describe it as, like going out to the ocean, taking a dropper and put one drop of water into the vast ocean. That's what it's like for a soul to be, merged with Brahman. You cease to exist. You're just absorbed into it. And so you can see this is quite different from Christianity in that regard. But when we get into Hinduism, we'll get into more details about all of this as we get there. But this maybe helps you see the difference between Christianity and Hinduism. Gods are primarily powers of nature, so that's why they're within that circle of the world. But in their thinking, gods are not separate from creation, and they are all part of this world as it's seen, and illusionary as it is. There's a transmigration of soul through samsara, this reincarnation, and then Brahman, the universal experience, exists in the world. but it's its own type of entity in itself, and we often call it some kind of universal spirit. Cyclical history, so it's not linear. There'll be any end. It continues indefinitely in this cycle of life, death, reincarnation, new existence. And of course, you got the multiple gods, but the gods are stuck in this system as well. And they may, in their mythology, they can die and come back in an avatar or a different level or different place in the reincarnation. So keep that in mind as well. All right, here's another one. It's not too different from the Hindu one, and you do have you have this world out here, and but in it you have this cycle, samsara, reincarnation, and the individual there. But so you can see this is what we call Theravada Buddhism, and this is the original Buddhism. It came out of Hinduism, and in Buddhism they believe a lot like the Hindu, except there's no gods, and the individual, the Atman, the soul of the individual in Hinduism goes through this cycle, but not in uh, Buddhism. Only the karma, the good deeds and bad deeds, cycle through reincarnation. If your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, you'll come up back in a higher level of purity in society. And if you should be so good as to be able to escape from this cycle, which is the purpose of Buddha, who developed this religion, he was the first to find enlightenment. In other words, to get released from the cycle of samsara into what is called nirvana. I saw, I guess today, someone was wearing a sweatshirt and it said Nirvana on it. And I didn't know if they were talking about the old rock group Nirvana or this had something to do with Buddhism. But Nirvana just means you cease to exist. It's not like the Christian view of heaven. And so you can see this is quite different. There is no God in this system. All right, so in Theravada Buddhism, the world is psychologically real. That's all, but not physically real as we think of it. Only karma exists after death, so you die, the only thing there is left is your good deeds, bad deeds. Everything exists in a state of impermanence, change, and no death. You're just cycling through this cycle of reincarnation. Nothing eternal is eternal within the person. So there's no soul. So there's no transmigration of soul, as it says. No God, no theistic, a non-theistic ethical system. So they have a very strong ethical system. And we would agree in Christianity with a lot of their morals and things they teach about being ethical, is that they have a very strong moral philosophy. But they're quite different in how they view the world, the history, how they view history, and what's the ultimate goal in Theravada Buddhism as opposed to Christianity. The ultimate goal is nirvana, release from suffering, the cycle of rebirth and attachments to the world, to eternal bliss by one's own effort. And the eternal bliss is you just cease to exist. We'll get into this more as we get into Theravada Buddhism. But if you can visualize these models, you can see how different they are from each other. And this indicates, when you're studying or talking with somebody, their understanding of the world, their worldview can be quite significantly different than your own. And so this is hopefully helps you to distinguish the difference. If this is another one, very much like the Theravada Buddhists, but in this one, Buddha has been elevated to the status of God in various types of this type of religion. This is called Mahayana Buddhism, which came as an offshoot off of the original Buddhism of Theravada Buddhism. And you get a mix of things with this one. It's nirvana may not be just ceasing to exist. It could be referred to as heaven or hell. You in Theravada Buddhism, it's very hard to get to meditate your way out of the cycle of reincarnation, and very few people have ever been able to accomplish it. And but in Mahayana Buddhism, the philosophy is such that it's more accomplishable for a person to get outside of the cycle of reincarnation. And that's to do if they practice a lot of compassion and love and things like that, which we would, as Christians, agree with. But again, notice, Buddha has made God, and you still have this illusionary world out here, and you still have the cycle of reincarnation. So there's still quite a big difference between this religion and Christianity. So when we think of these, kind of have to realize just how different things are, and and really when you think about it, the ones that are trying to get out of the cycle are the spiritual leaders, and these are your monks. The common person who is a Buddhist, all they do is they live to give service to the monks, like donate food or help build a monastery or whatever it may be. They really don't even try to get out of the cycle. And it's because everybody knows you just extremely hard to do it, and very few accomplish it. All right. So for this Mahayana, again, the world's an illusion, supreme reality from which the universe emanates. So you still have this power out there. But Gautama Buddha is deified, regarded as a transitory manifestation of reality. In other words, he too is illusionary in a sense. He's this transitory manifestation of reality. It just shows you the whole aspect of Buddhism is still very illusionary. Appeal to absolute for release from suffering. So, if you devote yourself to Buddha, he can help you get out of this samsara easier than you could in Theravada Buddhism. Enlightenment is attained by compassion for humanity, so you get a lot of emphasis on the ethical side of things. All right, so here's another one. This one, you have the material world, but then you have this kind of mystical realm that's mainly in the material world, but can move outside the material world to things. And it's only one way. Whatever the mystical power is, it goes one way. It's not a personal thing that you can, have a relationship with. This is a spiritualism worldview. Some type of new age might fall into this category. World and God or gods are intertwined. So, you have the spiritual thing, spirit power. It's in rocks, it's in trees, particularly stronger in places where the trees are virgin forest or and a rainforest that has its original trees. God or gods exist in all things and beings. It's a type of pantheism, so that God and power can be in crystals sometimes. They talk about having a crystal, and you see them wear around their neck sometimes. But in this one, you have God kind of ensconced in his own creation. In the creation, but they wouldn't necessarily believe God created everything. It's more that they've deified the physical world. So, but you do get a mix of Eastern mysticism, Western scientific speculation. So all kinds of belief systems could fall in this in some way or another, with a lot of variations in what they believe. This one you could say, well, we are God, because part of that power not only is in the streams and rocks and crystals, but they're in us as well. And so a very fluid type of worldview. All right, well, we're going to start another section. So we're going to save that for the next video, because we're going to do some comparison between the different worldviews and recognize how they are different in the overall. And this will help lead us into the individual studies of the various religions, because we'll have an overall concept of how to tell the difference between their worldviews. But then when we get into the details of where these differences are, because these are just broad categories that we're talking about here, but there are a lot of, within those categories, there's a lot of details. And we'll be covering that on the third video in the series on discerning worldviews. And so I'll bid you goodbye on this video, and we'll see you on the third one coming up after it.